If you recall, just a few days ago, the House and the Senate joined hands and passed a $1.2 trillion funding package, averting a partial shutdown of the U.S. federal government. It was signed by President Biden shortly after that. But did you know that just before they passed this $1.2 trillion funding package, that the Senate unanimously approved a resolution just a couple of days before that, calling the debt a threat to the national security of the United States and calling expected future budget deficits unsustainable, irresponsible, and dangerous. The author points out that this is a non-binding resolution, so it really just doesn't mean anything, but I guess tries to say that it's hopeful because at least they're admitting we have a problem. And as they point out, just after the passage of the resolution and before the passage of the $1.2 trillion funding bill, the Congressional Budget Office published its latest long-term budget projections. The report showed that annual budget deficits are on pace to grow from an expected $1.6 trillion this year to $2.6 trillion in 2034, $4.4 trillion in 2044, and $7.3 trillion in 2054. And this seems an appropriate time to flash the usdebtclock.org website up to show you just how fast our national debt is advancing. $34.6 trillion and counting. And U.S. unfunded liabilities down here in the bottom right, $214 trillion and change that is ever growing. But getting back to it, the article continues, as a result of those rising budget deficits, the national debt will continue to accelerate upward. The CBO projects that the federal government's debt will total $114 trillion by 2054. This year, payments on the existing debt will total an estimated $870 billion, which is more than the Pentagon's budget. Debt payments have jumped by 32% since 2023, thanks to higher interest rates and a larger pile of debt. And here's another interesting little tidbit. First, there's this quote from this woman, Maya McGinnis, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. There's no way to look at these eye-popping numbers without realizing we need to make a change. And yet we have lawmakers promising what they won't do. I won't raise taxes. I won't fix Social Security. I won't pay for all the things I do want to do. And so we continue on this dangerous path. And apparently, the next day, I think after this report came out, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson told reporters that he supports plans for a so-called fiscal commission, which could propose some solutions to Congress's budgeting problems, but, get this, only if the agency could not suggest tax increases or cuts to entitlement programs. One more note here, former Congressman Dr. Ron Paul chimed in on this as well and pointed out that this $1.2 trillion spending bill also funds, in addition to the usual increases in war and welfare spending, the bill funds gender transitioning for minors without parental consent and red flag laws, which will allow law enforcement to seize an individual's pew-pews without due process. And Dr. Paul, I think, has some very wise words here. The only way out of this is for Congress to begin winding down the welfare warfare state. A good place to start is by cutting spending on militarism and foregoing interventionism. Savings from these cuts could be used to ensure those dependent on entitlement and welfare programs are not harmed as Congress winds down these programs. Responsibility for providing support for the truly needy should be returned to local and religious charitable institutions, while responsibility for education should be returned to local communities and parents. Congress should also pass legislation requiring any new spending to be offset by cuts in other federal spending and forbidding the Federal Reserve from purchasing federal debt instruments. These steps will be opposed by the special interests that benefit from the current system, but they are the only way to ensure the blessings of liberty and prosperity to our posterity.